Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe and healthy. Today we're going to continue our conversation on reading the Bible. So when we're reading the Bible, in order to fully understand any given text, we must first acknowledge two questions. The first being, what does the text say? And the second, what does the text mean? So what does the text say? This deals with the then and there of the text. What did it mean to its original audience? How did they hear it and understand it and respond to it? This is more important than we realize, okay? Keep that in mind. The second question, what does the text mean? This deals with the here and now of the text. How do we respond to it? How do we hear it and read it and understand it? We must never address the here and now before we address the then and there. This is very important. If we address the here and now first and then go to the then and there, we're handling the scriptures poorly. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. How do we handle the text wholly? How do we treat the text as it is? First, we're going to have to recognize the then and there of the text. By beginning, what we should first do is define our first task, okay? Our first task in recognizing what the text says is called exegesis. All right, don't let that scare you away. Exegesis is the thorough analysis of a text to determine its meaning. So biblical exegesis involves the careful study of each scripture to discover its intended original meaning. When we read, we should ask ourselves, what was the original intent of the author when he wrote this text, right? We can only find this out when we learn to think exegetically, okay? Another big term. How do we do this? All right? By continuing to read the scriptures day after day. The more we read, the easier thinking exegetically becomes. So, where should we start? How should we begin? Good exegesis requires knowledge of a few different things, okay? First being biblical languages, so the Greek and Hebrew. Second, the Jewish culture and customs of the time. The third, Greco-Roman culture and customs of the time. And the fourth, primary resources, so first-hand accounts. But the vast majority of us don't know this type of knowledge. We don't know all of these things. So that's all right, because we've got experts to help us out with that. We don't necessarily need this knowledge in our brains to do good exegesis. That's what the experts are for. That's what their resources are for. We can draw on those resources. We're blessed to be able to get those pretty easily. But before we turn to the experts, we must know how to use our own skills first. We must first learn to read the biblical text carefully. That's the first step to good exegesis, reading the text carefully. We then need to be able to ask the right questions, okay? So how do we do this? How do we think exegetically? Well, there are two main ways for us to begin to think and read exegetically. The first being we need to understand the expectations of the text. Who was it written to? The Israelites or Christians? New Testament or Old Testament? How was it written? Was it prose or poetry? Remember, we've spoke about this, and what is the literary genre? Whether it be epistle, historical narrative, gospel, prophecy, what is the biblical literary genre? By knowing these things, we can more easily understand what we're getting into and what we're about to read. Okay, the second way that we can begin to read and think exegetically is by establishing the context of the text. So this one is twofold. We first need to establish the literary context, and we also need to establish the historical and cultural context. Now we'll go through these each, so don't tune out yet. What is the literary context? What does literary context mean? So the literary context of a text is what most people are referring to when they talk about reading something in context, right? This is arguably the most important aspect of biblical exegesis. And we can easily do this without turning to the experts, right? The literary context of any text is the material that comes before and after the text. So, for example, the context of a word is its sentence. The context of a sentence is its paragraph. Context of a paragraph is its chapter, and so on and so forth, right? The literary context is what is around the particular passage that you are reading. So the literary context can provide the specific meaning for words that have multiple meanings otherwise, okay? And we'll get into a little bit of this later on. So when we're reading the Bible, we shouldn't just jump to or quote from a verse or passage without first knowing its literary context. That's called bad exegesis. So first, we need to see the context of the passage and verse before we quote or use it, all right, to avoid bad exegesis. So that is literary context. That is how we do literary context and kind of what it is. So the next one, historical and cultural context. What is this? The goal of historical and cultural context is to comprehend the historical setting and cultural features of a specific passage as clearly as we possibly can. The historical and cultural context allows us to ask two questions of the text. When was the time and culture of the author and audience? That's the where and when. And the second, what was the occasion for writing? That is the who and why. So we're going to address both of these questions. So first, we're going to look at the where and when. What was the time and culture of the author and audience? When looking for the where and when of the text, we should first isolate certain key features that lead to further investigation. Okay, this sounds like a lot of work, and sometimes it can be, but don't worry, we can all do this. We should isolate places, cities, regions of where the text takes place, customs and traditions that were going on in this area, the people of the area, and we should isolate the value of certain practices or objects to this culture or to these people. So, for instance, by knowing more about the where and when and what the time and culture of the author and audience was, we can better understand the parables of Jesus. So, for example, in the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, this is found in Matthew chapter 20. The landowner gives his laborers each a denarius for their work, right, in the vineyard. So by knowing that a denarius was equal to 1 day's labor, we can better put ourselves into that parable and understand the thoughts and the feelings of the laborers, right? So having such knowledge can help us engage better with the text. This is very important when reading the Bible. So that is the then and there, the when and where rather. That's how we address that. Now, how do we address the who and why? What was the occasion for writing this particular passage? By understanding the why and to whom a text was written, we can better understand why or what was written in the text, rather. For example, Paul wrote tons of letters, but each letter was written to a different church under different circumstances. Okay, you can see the who and why everywhere in Paul's letters. The occasion and purpose of each biblical book, not just the letters, is usually found within the text itself. We can find the who and why, and that can help us better understand the what is in the text. So that is historical and cultural context. First, we begin with the where and when. Where was it? What was the culture like? What were the people like? What were their values, customs? Then we can look at the who and why. Why was it written? Who was it written to? This can help us better engage with the text. So in order to fully understand what we are reading in the Bible, we should ask ourselves two questions. What does the text say? And what does the text mean? Once we understand the expectations of the passage, the biblical genre, how it was written, and we understand the context of the passage, the literary and the historical cultural context, then we can answer our first question. What does the text say? Without knowing what the text says, we can never accurately interpret its meaning. Faithful exegesis of the text allows for faithful interpretation. And we're going to get to that second question. What does the text mean? Later on in the next video. So, hope this was a blessing to everyone. Big word, exegesis. Hope you can remember that sticks out in your mind, and that you can learn something from this video, and that you can share the love of God and share the blessings that His Word provide for you with others. So, thanks for watching once again, and take care.